Welcome back, everyone, to another Unboxed broadcast. Today, we're picking up on the second part of our last show, our previous show, on the 7 steps that every leader can take to affect and improve a healthy workplace environment. So, stick around as we head into part 2 of the show.
I'm Dr. Robert Davis, family life educator and leadership coach. This is my co-host, R.P. Soriano. Soriano attended Johns Hopkins Carey Business School, worked in the financial industry, and was an international consultant before partnering with me to launch UnBoxed to Lead. Me? Well, I worked for over 20 years as a senior pastor and a community organizer. Then I retired and started a leaders peer support community called UnBoxed to Lead. Soriano and I have been friends since the early 90s, and with our varied experiences and expertise, we help leaders reach the next level in their leadership. So join us for the next few moments as we unbox the power and the potential of your relationships, your leadership, and your life.
All right, welcome back, everyone. R.P. Soriano here with the incomparable, or some other I word, Dr. Robert Davis. We're picking up on the second part of our show on how leaders can become more responsible in creating a healthy workplace culture. So we have 7 steps that we are going through, and we've made it through half of those. So we're going to just do a quick recap here of what we talked about last show. The first was to be intentional and to engage in best thinking. And then we talked about creating a space for best thinking among your team. And then we got to striving, or how to strive to be as competent in your job as possible. So that brings us to step number 4. And I'm going to punt over to Dr. Davis and let him share that, what the 4th step with us is.
And as we talked about before, a leader has a responsibility to create a healthy workplace culture, healthy workplace environment. And I want to make sure that I encourage you to like, subscribe, and share, and also to check out our website. That's www.unboxed2lead.com, unboxedtolead.com. So the 4th thing that is so important for leaders is that leaders strive to show up as a calm, less anxious person. That is your responsibility, to show up. Everyone cannot be running around talking about the sky is falling, everything is on fire, every man for himself. And I know that there's a lot of stress and a lot of pressure that is placed on the leader, but a leader really does have to be intentional about showing up as calm and as less anxious as they can. There's a reality, Raphael, that anxiety is kind of like a fire, and so it spreads, and based on the environment will determine how fast the fire spreads. So of course, if there's a fire in a very dry forest, then that fire is going to spread a lot further than if the fire is surrounded by rocks and inside of a dirt pit. So what a leader has to do is not only be intentional about not starting the fire. You remember we were raised up on Smokey Bear. Only you can prevent forest fires. That's my Smokey Bear impersonation. But not only is the leader responsible for not preventing the anxiety fire, but a leader also has to think in terms of, how do I serve as a firewall to prevent anxiety from spreading? And one of the things that I encourage people to do, and of course, Raphael, just jump on in here because I can go. One of the things that I encourage people to do is to observe when anxiety is at its highest among your team. And you'll start to pick up that, it's probably those deadlines when reports are due, and there's other, seminal events that take place within the organization, or seminal things that happen in the life of the organization that causes the highest levels of anxiety. And when a leader can identify what that is and then can adjust how they function and how they show up, again, to try not to start the fire, but also to serve as a firewall that really helps the leader to be very effective in what they do.
I think uh, neither of us has ever met a metaphor that we didn't like, right? So we're talking about fires here. The thing about fire is it's usually, especially when you're talking about a home fire or even a forest fire, a lot of times it's not the fire that kills you, it's the smoke. And a lot of times it can be a small fire, relatively small fire, but if the smoke gets out of control, it just chokes everyone. And I use that to represent kind of those pressures that you're talking about, not only the work pressures, but also the home pressures. Some of us may be the sole provider of income in our family, and if you're having a hard time at work or having a hard time with family, or you're stuck in kind of this sandwich generation where you're taking care of kids as well as taking care of older aging parents, this can be pretty suffocating, and it does become important that you have a smoke alarm. Right. You talked about how when is the anxiety building up and hitting a certain level, the leader needs to be able to be aware of that. And it needs to be aware that, hey, if the fire isn't necessarily cooking here at work, where is it cooking? What's going on? Is there something going on at home? You probably will not be able to solve it, but you can also look to provide resources, let the employee know that you're there for them, that the team is there for them, to try to alleviate some of this, because wherever the anxiety is coming from, it's going to cause a kind of an appropriate response, right? Like getting out of a fire requires the complete counterintuitive reaction, and that is to be calm. Okay. Right. I mean, when you see fire, yes, you want to put as much distance between you and that event as possible. But the more out of control you are, the more counterproductive you can be. And that's so it does require to be calm and less anxious, when you're trying to affect this kind of change, and to help the team that you're leading learn how to become more calm and less anxious. But if the leader does show up, like you said, if the leader shows up and the sky is falling and house is on fire, and that's not going to help. You don't want your team being in the position where they have to calm you down, where they have to figure out, okay, how are we going to calm Raphael down? He comes in here red hot, freaking out, running around like a chicken with his head cut off all the time. You don't want your team being responsible for calming you down.
That's so true. I'll never forget with our second child, my wife, we had just several things, perfect storm. We had just moved. This is when I was pastoring. We just moved from Louisiana to Texas. So from a small town, Louisiana, we're now in the DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth. And my wife is pregnant, and she had to change her OBGYN a month before the baby was to be before our daughter was to be born. And she ended up having to have an emergency C-section. And I'll never forget just how nervous the doctor was. And man, I'm at a place where I'm out of control. What I mean by that is I had no control over the situation because I don't know anything about medicine. And sure. The doctor was just literally freaking out. And when we went to the follow-up visit, we saw the doctor standing. We saw the doctor standing behind her office. So she freaked out in the delivery room, and then we saw her behind her office, and she was smoking a cigarette. And it really dawned on us, here's someone that has a very difficult time managing anxiety. And one of the ways, of course, that she helps to calm herself some is by smoking a cigarette. But when a woman comes in who is about to lose her life and the life of the baby, you can't, step out and take a cigarette break. So she was just nervous and out of control. Fortunately, things turned out well. And yeah. This is one of the reasons when we talk about being being calmer and less anxious. This is one of the reasons I really encourage leaders to think systems and to learn how to think in terms of relationship systems. When I talk about systems, I'm talking about relationship systems. And to be able, and when you do that, this is what happens. When you learn to think in terms of relationship systems, there's a tremendous book I want to recommend to everyone, two of them actually. The first one is called Everything Isn't Terrible. And the second one is called Growing Yourself Up. Growing Yourself Up. Everything Isn't Terrible and Growing Yourself Up are two tremendous books. But when you learn to think systems, you are able to see what is going on inside of the relationship dynamics of the workplace and the relationship dynamics at home, etc. And then you're able to see the part that you are playing. And then you gain the skills to be able, this goes back to our first thing about becoming a thinker, to be able to think about ways to modify your functioning and your behavior so that you improve the entire relationship system. So this is what's going on. This is the part I'm playing. And this is how, these are the small adjustments and modifications that I'm going to make to improve how I operate, which will in turn improve the entire relationship system. This is so important for leaders to do. Another thing that is important for leaders to do is to actually study how to be calmer, less anxious leaders. And not just to be redundant, Raphael, this is where, as you mentioned a moment ago, in our last broadcast, about mindfulness, about being more thoughtful, about the practice of mindfulness, so that you can actually observe. And one of the things that you, when you first introduced me to the concept of mindfulness, you talked about how, the great sages would sit and they would do a practice of just observing themselves in relationship dynamics, and kind of that out of body experience, if you will, where you're looking at yourself, whether you're looking at yourself from birth all the way through death and becoming comfortable with that, or whether it's just an individual relationship where I step back and I just look and I'm hyper focusing on, okay, this is how I sound. These are the words that I use when I'm interacting with this person. This is how the volume that I'm using. This is how I bring other people into the problem. This is how I distance myself from that person or from the problem, and becoming very clear about and being very aware. That's the word, not clear, but aware of how I'm operating, and becoming more aware about how that is impacting and influencing and directing the relationship. Again, that thinking, that being intentional about observing, has a profound impact. So I encourage people just to study how to be calmer, how to be less anxious. And, as you shared in the last broadcast, mindfulness is a phenomenal way just to do that.
Yeah, and those are things that we focus on in our trainings as well. I mean, that's what we spend a lot of time on. We can't go through all of these things here, but the experience with UnBoxed to Lead is certainly more intensive, and helps you to also basically not only gain new skills, but to understand what you can and cannot change, and to be at peace with that. And you talk about this, Robert. This is about behavior change. Yeah. Our behavior is really much steeped in our automatic responses to things that we've just developed, behaviors we've developed all the time, and they just become automatic. One of the things that mindfulness certainly helps with is, you talked about that observation piece. So behavior change can happen kind of in two ways, or there are two ways that can help you with changing behavior. Sometimes it's just knowing what you're doing. A lot of times we just don't know that we're doing what we're doing. Like you said, we don't know that we're yelling. We're just not aware of it. We're not mindful of it. And like you said, taking that step back and realizing, wow, I'm raising my voice, or I'm speaking in a very hard tone, or whatever the case may be, whatever it is. But sometimes just observing it changes the behavior, becoming aware of it. Oh, I didn't know I was doing that. I didn't know that was my behavior. I just wasn't aware that I was doing it. But now that I'm aware, sometimes you don't know it until you see it on screen. I have all these videos of me and my kids, and I listen to the way sometimes I talk, and then I go, oh my God, I didn't know that I could be so annoying. Now I know what my wife's talking about, it's like that kind of
Yes.
thing, right? That changes the behavior. And then there's the times where you just have to go in and you literally have to do an overhaul. You have to change out each wire. You have to change out each
Yeah.
element of that. And that's the harder piece that a lot of us don't want to have to face. But observing sometimes will help you change the behavior before you get in and be like, oh man, this whole thing is wired wrong. And I've got to go in and rewire everything. All right, let's move on to the.
But let me say one last thing,
sorry.
because this is important here on this one as well. I know we got to move on, but also, a good smartwatch that you set to tell you when your oxygen level is dropping or when your heart rate is increasing, that gives you a little beep or whatever. That is tremendous, because your body, and the more that you're in tune with your body will tell you when you are becoming anxious. Your body will tell you when you're becoming tense and stressed. And just having that knowledge, just having a neutral observer or neutrally observing how you are. So hold on a second. I notice that my breathing is becoming, deeper. I notice that my pulse is becoming faster. What's going on right now? Those biometric indicators. That's the word.
Sweating all of a sudden. All of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel, I'm observing and I'm feeling myself becoming more tense, and the stress and the pressure actually being applied to my body. All right, what's going on here? Let me think about how I want my body to function, how I want to show up, how I want to operate based off of the type of culture and environment.
You bring up a good point here, and this is another part of mindfulness. And I don't want to keep wailing on this for too much longer, but it also becomes, what choice am I making here? What is a choice in the behavior that I'm making that's causing my heart rate to rise? I'm choosing to react this way to this person or this situation. Ultimately, I'm choosing to react that way. Is there another choice here? Is there another way I can react to this that will calm me down? Doesn't mean that you are not seeing the situation for what it is, or that it's a serious situation, but you're ultimately, the raise in heart rate, the anxiety, ultimately it is, I got to step really careful here because I'm not a medical professional, but in the case of mindfulness protection, in many instances, ultimately that anxiety stems from a choice that we're making on how we're responding to it. I don't want to get into, there's some people that you need medication to regulate that. That's a different thing. I'm not talking about severe, anxiety response. I'm just talking about levels of anxiety that can be managed by the choices that you're making. And this is when we get back to the thinking, engage in best thinking, because if you have that skill and you can calm down and see yourself in the midst of this, you can find the best way to think about this.
And G.I. Joe said it so well. Now you know, and knowing is half the battle.
And knowing is half the battle. Man, the wisdom of 80s cartoons. I mean, we should have a whole show on the lessons that we learned when we were a kid. And now they used to have the little, at the end, they have the little lesson, the moral lesson there.
And we're moving to the next one. That's part of what actually happens with people who experience severe anxiety and panic attacks that have to be controlled with medication. They still try to help them to identify when their anxiety levels are rising, what's going on, and things of that nature.
Right.
So they're not mutually exclusive. It's still important whether yours is minor that just impacts what's going on in the workplace, or whether it is severe to the point that may cause hospitalization or the need for medication. That first step of just becoming more aware is actually the first step in improvement. It's actually the very first step in improvement.
All right, number 5.
Number 5 is clearly, you are responsible for clearly defining your leadership role and responsibilities. That's one of the things, and this really does help the leader not to do the most, which is a more of a colloquial way of saying over functioning for the team.
Right. When
the leader clearly defines what their leadership roles are and what their responsibilities are, one of the things that we teach in UnBoxed to lead is helping leaders to become clear about who they are responsible to and what they are responsible for. And it's not just enough for you to have that information that's tucked away, but also for you to be able to articulate that to your team. This is who I am responsible to, and this is what I am responsible for. And I have discovered that the most effective time to share that is not when, tensions are high, stress is high, deadlines are pressing down, but just in the normal course of time to share. One great psychologist, he's a professor now at Lombardy University and a friend of mine, he says that I make myself known so that I might be known. I think that's so important for a leader to make themselves known to their team, to share little things like, hey, one of the things that I'm trying to work on to improve is not to take on too much of a load. I'm literally just sharing this with the team or individuals in the team. I'm trying to work on not taking on too much of a load and kind of staying in my lane. So there may be times when you're going to see me pulling back from some of the things that I would normally do, because I really want to focus on these things that I'm responsible for, such as A, B, and C.
And that becomes important in communicating to people on your team who might struggle with the same kind of issue of taking up too much. We talk about modeling. We talk about, hey, this is what I'm working on. You also may be having that issue. So, here are some things that I'm learning on how to mitigate that. These are kind of one-on-one conversations, right? In this way, but also put it back on the person that you're coaching as well. Tell me some ways that you handle that might be able to help me or might be able to help us both, because I'm the type of person that will take all the load. You're the type of person that'll take all the load. We'll have a whole team that won't do any work. At the end of the day, we'll be doing all of the work. So we need to kind of look out for each other. We need to make sure that we're able to make sure that people are doing what they need to be doing, and that we're doing what we need to be doing. That's what's best for the team.
Exactly. That is so important. That hits the nail right on the head. And that kind of leads us into our sixth point, which is not only clearly define your leadership role and responsibilities, but clearly define the leadership roles of the leadership team. One of the things that has been observed by leadership coaches and gurus is that within organizations, often the higher you get in the organization and the more titles you get and the higher your pay, the less clear your job description is. So if you think about the guy that's in the warehouse, his job description is very simple. We want you to put a minimum of 1,000 widgets in these boxes. We really want 1,000. That is about as clear a job description as you can get. I mean, they are told down to how much tape to use to close up the box, how to put the widget in the box, how to stack the stuff, the foam around the widget so it doesn't break when it's being shipped. Very clear. And then as you get higher up the ladder, it becomes less defined about what the role of the leader is. So great leaders bring about clarity to the other leaders on their leadership team that they are responsible for. So that goes back to who am I responsible to and what am I responsible for? So one of the things I'm responsible to the leaders that report to me. And one of the things that I'm responsible for is giving them clarity about what the expectation for their job is, and taking that same type of approach that we use to the line worker, where we say we want this many widgets put into these boxes and ready for shipping by this time. And then we tell the other person, we want you to take the widgets once they're put in the box and put them onto the truck so that it looks just like this. And everybody at the lower entry level, if you will, are very clear about what their responsibilities are. So leaders think through, how do I articulate to my leaders exactly what their responsibilities are? without necessarily putting them in the same type of box, unfortunately, that we put leaders on the smaller level, because not on the small level, I apologize, but our leaders that are more on the entry level, that's the more appropriate term, that are more on the entry level. Because what we don't want is, we don't want those who are responsible for leadership to either A, do too much, or to do too less. And too often the responsibilities of entry level positions, as I just shared, are clearly defined. But the higher we get in the organization, the less clear the description expectation becomes. When leaders have unclear roles, they have a tendency to either do one of two things: underperform or to overfunction for the team. And this kind of goes to that whole thing about promoting someone beyond the level of their competence. I think sometimes we promote people beyond the level of our clarity.
Mm.
We
Yeah.
promote people beyond the level. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think those are very good points. I think sometimes this happens because leaders, there's a quality in many leaders that they become kind of a victim of their own success. So one of the qualities that one of the good qualities of a good leader is their tolerance for ambiguity. The ability to make sense out of ambiguity. So you can give a good leader, I have to say my wife is very good at this. You can give her a few points, on a graph, and she's able to connect the dots very well. So someone can come to her and say, we kind of want to do this, or we're thinking about this, and she can find out how it all connects and where it's going to go. And leaders are really good. Leaders tend to have that skill or that ability to take what is not necessarily clear information and do, and to lead. And so they kind of, that's part of what gets them recognized, part of what gets them promoted. But I think you make a great point that as you get to a point when you're interacting with your leadership team, if you have a lot of people who have a high tolerance for ambiguity, then things don't tend to get spelled out or clarified. And that becomes important. You still need to do that, because you still run the risk, as you're saying, of either over functioning or underperforming, because there's only so far you can go with ambiguity, right? There's a point where it needs to be clearly defined, the roles and the expectations that needs to be clearly defined so that people can do their best work. But I think a lot of times, as you're saying, I think leaders, as they move up, they become kind of a victim of that own of their success and that skill of being able to manage ambiguity. You have some people, they have to be micromanaged. They just don't. It's like well, I'm not gonna say that. I wanted to make an example of kind of like my children, but I don't want to talk about adults being children. But some people do, wherever they are in their career, or even some people all the way through in their career, it just needs to be spelled out for them, step by step by step. And then some people, you just give them a little bit of something, and the next thing you know, you've got a masterpiece. And you wonder, how did they come up with that? And it's just because they're able to connect the dots a little bit better than others.
Yeah, that is so true. And the clearer we can be about what our expectations are for our leaders as well, not just what their responsibilities are, but also what our expectations are.
Mm-hmm.
Again, sometimes we just, hey, you're a leader, you're here, get her done, taking care of business. I remember when Kramer was asked what was his job when he was working at Lehman's, and he said to TOB, what is that? Taking care of business. What does that mean? So, when we can be clear about expectations, that also helps an awful lot. Each one of these we could talk about each one of them forever. So I'm gonna let you. I know you're ready to move on to the next one, so I'm gonna move on right along with you.
All right, let's go to number 7 here. Our final step here.
Final step, and that is develop and share clear, well-defined principles that you live and lead by. Clear, well-defined principles. And this goes back, and if you want to see the webinar that took place 2 weeks ago, which is phenomenal about, really developing these things, clear, well-defined principles that you live and lead by, etc., then please email us at info@unboxedtolead.com. That's info@ unboxed the number 2 lead.com, and we will send you a link so that you can see this webinar. But great leaders know the type of culture that they want in their workplace, and they are clear about who they need to be and the principles that they need to live by in order to execute that, in order to make that a reality. But they also not only develop them and say, okay, here's the vision of the type of culture I want. These are the principles that I'm going to, and this is the type of leader that I'm going to need to be and must be and want to be. But then the next step is articulating that to our team. Sometimes people have all of these wonderful things in their minds, principles that they are living by. That's awesome. But when you're not sharing it, it can be frustrating for the rest of the team because the team has no clue that this is why you do what you do the way you do it.
Yeah, and you run the risk of them feeling like their hands get slapped if they come to you with something that kind of is not part of your principles or the way that you live. They have no idea of knowing. Yeah. They may say, hey, should we present X, Y, and Z to this individual this way? Or, you may say, well, that's not necessarily not the way I would do it, but it doesn't align with a certain principle. I don't share, unclear numbers, for instance. It has to be very clear. So someone thinks, well, maybe we should estimate, or, and then if you not respond to it harshly, but you could give them the impression that their hands are getting slapped when they really didn't even know that was and that may be the worst possible example of that. I'm just trying to
with you
kind
of and you're hitting that you're really driving down the right street. I appreciate that. Again, the email, if you want to see the webinar that really delved deeper into this, is info@unboxed the number 2 lead, unboxedtolead.com. One of the things that leaders are taught when it comes to vision casting is to share the vision, and when you're finished, share it some more. So as you were just alluding to, it's not just about sharing it during times of difficulty. It's important to share it then as well. But during times of peace, and the great companies, the great leaders, this is what they do. They say, this is the type of culture that we want here at, Davis Enterprises. This is the type, and they cast that vision. We want our team members to have this type of experience. We want our team members to have these types of relationships, to interact in this type of way. We want our customers to have this type of experience when they interact with us. I think one of the ones that just gets it is Chick-fil-A. Everyone who goes, I've never in all my life interacted with someone who had a poor experience at Chick-fil-A. And I'm sure there have been those who have had it. I've never interacted with them. Everyone that I've ever heard talk about Chick-fil-A talks about just how they really try to treat the customer like the customer is the center of the world during the time that they're interacting with them. And that's been my experience as well. And this comes from that drilling. This is what you're going to get when you come to Chick-fil-A. This is how our employees conduct themselves. This is what you can expect. And great leaders share that with their team. This is what we want our workplace to look like, to be like, and this is how we want you to feel when you are here. And this is what I'm going to do as a leader to make that possible. These are the principles that I'm going to operate by as your leader to make this a reality, to share it, and when you're done, share it again.
And the flip side of that, and some things that I've experienced, and I'm sure you've experienced as well, is leaders who kind of operate not by clear, well-defined principles, but instead by the kind of the delusion of what they think they are, or what they think the company is, and how they think the company is performing, but they haven't listened, or they haven't listened to the customer, and they haven't listened to any of their team or their managers telling them that we are not what you think we are. And so it becomes important as we look at these steps here, right? You have to create space for best thinking. You talked about groupthink earlier. All of these things are important for you to be able, for the leader to be able to have that and share those clear, well-defined principles, or to say, this is the experience that you are going to have. And these are the tools that I'm going to help provide for you to be able to do that. Because I know I've been in situations where I've heard the president of the company say, we do this and we do that. And I'm looking around going, what organization is he talking about? I'm not quite sure. That is not, no, we don't do that. Like,
I put a resume into that place, wherever he's talking about.
Yeah, exactly. That sounds fantastic. But I work at this company and I can tell you, being on the front lines here, I'm telling you, we don't do that. You may want to, if that's what you want to do, then be clear that that's what you want to do and start the process of making that happen. But don't tell me that that is exactly what is happening. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I actually have to check in with other people and say, hey, I heard him say that. Am I not doing what I'm supposed to do? And they just shake their head and they just, nobody is doing that. Nobody here is doing that. You're not crazy. I think this our great dear leader is having some delusions of grandeur here on what he thinks this organization is, but it clearly is not that.
Yeah. And oftentimes that becomes because they don't have a clear, well-defined principles. And so they woke up this morning, or maybe they just read another book or went to another workshop or seminar, and they're like, hey, guess what, everybody? This is who we are.
Maybe they walked into Chick-fil-A.
Yeah. Like, hey, guess who we are?
This is who they are. When they're really, that's right. Yeah. When they're really Taco Bell, right? That's the problem.
Where your food gets thrown at you. No, I'm not saying that happens at Taco Bell. I've never had anyone. No. I don't want to get sued. I've never had anyone throw anything at me at Taco Bell. But there is a difference. There's a difference between the experience at Chick-fil-A and the experience.
Boy, they sure look like they wanted to throw it at you. They may not have, but I know that look. I've had enough stuff thrown at me.
So I know what it looks like when they want to. I want to make sure, because I don't want Taco Bell. They have some pretty deep pockets. I don't want them coming after us, man.
Yeah, we're not making that accusation. We're just saying there is a slight bit of difference, and I think we all know the difference. Yeah.
Now that we barely dodged that lawsuit, let me just tell you again what those 7 steps are. These are the 7 responsibilities that a leader has if they're going to create a healthy workplace culture. And that is, you're responsible for being intentional to engage in best thinking. You're responsible to create a space for best thinking among your team. You are responsible for striving to be as competent in your job as possible. You are responsible for striving to show up as a calm, less anxious person. You are responsible for clearly defining your leadership role and responsibilities. You are responsible for clearly defining the leadership roles of the leadership team. And you are responsible for developing and sharing clear, well-defined principles that you live and lead by. And that's what we call unboxed leadership.
Well, there we have it. I hope that this show has, I hope that this lesson or these lessons or these steps have helped. Hopefully you can think about these steps and not be thinking about Chick-fil-A and Taco Bell. That's one goal, or some of the other analogies that we throw around here. But this has been great for me. I can see the value and the importance of this. This is why Unboxed to Lead exists. We're not just talking about these things, but we also strive to make sure that we're giving leaders the tools to not only learn from us, but to learn from each other. And that's the essence of our leadership peer support communities as well, that we can create these mastermind situations and these networking opportunities where leaders can learn from themselves, as well as take a deep dive into the learning that we provide at Unboxed to Lead. So once again, for Dr. Robert Davis, I'm RP Soriano. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Please be sure to visit us at www.unboxedtolead to learn more about what we do. And we look forward to coming back to you next week with a new broadcast. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.
UnBoxed provides a full-service leaders peer support community that helps high-level leaders become more authentic leaders who build healthy workplace cultures. and reach their personal life goals. To learn more and discover how we can take your leadership and your life to the next level, please visit our website at unboxedtolead.com. That's unboxed2lead.com. Again, that's unboxed2lead.com.